So we're going to now go to Lauren Levey. She is a board member of WDI USA, also serves as coordinator of its Lesbian Caucus and coordinator of its State Legislative Advocacy Team. She also serves as coordinator for Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI. And she's going to talk to us today about LBORI and the WDI Lesbian Caucus submissions on gender stereotypes. So thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on. And thank you for the work you've been doing, which is brilliant. So over to you.
The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, set out the sex-based rights of women. These rights were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1979, and then they were further developed in subsequent years. As you may know, CEDAW forms the basis for WDI's Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. The CEDAW committee recently solicited submissions from women and from women's organizations on the subject of gender stereotypes and how to combat them. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus and the Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, each submitted a statement in response. Let me tell you a bit about these two lesbian organizations. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus is a team that I created in 2022. The first thing we did was write the Lesbian Bill of Rights, or the LBOR. This is a radical feminist lesbian document written in the form of a legislative bill that could be introduced in Congress or in any state legislature with minor modifications. It's basically a description of discriminatory circumstances that lesbians are subjected to, followed by a list of rights that we claim that would remedy those enumerated discriminatory circumstances. You can find the LBOR and every other article that the Lesbian Caucus has written on the WDI USA website, womensdeclarationusa.com. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus requires that anything we do or write should be consistent with the LBOR as well as with the Declaration. And we've written quite a lot of position papers on how to create lesbian communities in real life, on the 4B movement in the United States, on the problems with butch femme, and other radical feminist analyses about lesbians from a lesbian perspective. We've also submitted statements to government agencies, including USAID, for instance. In 2023, the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus was the founding member of Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, which is an international network of radical feminist lesbian organizations. LBORI currently has 5 members. Radical feminist lesbian organizations are not so common, so please let me know if you're aware of one that's not in our network yet. LBORI's current member organizations include the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus, Lots Reloaded in Germany, Lesbian Resistance in New Zealand, Lesbian Action Group in Australia, Lesbicon in Norway, and Archilesbica in Italy. So that's the background so that you'll know who the players are here. As I mentioned, the CEDAW committee put out a call for statements by individuals and organizations to address the topic of gender stereotypes and how to combat them. LBORI and the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus each submitted a statement. The LBORI statement was drafted by Lucia Gianci, representing Archilesbica, our member organization in Italy, and the rest of us made additions and edits. I'll just read the whole thing. To the CEDAW Secretariat, Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, is an international network of lesbian radical feminist organizations. Our principles are enumerated in the Lesbian Bill of Rights, or the LBOR. Gender stereotypes is a redundant expression because gender is the sum of stereotypes whereby society subjugates women. Gender is the cultural expression of the material oppression of women by men. For this reason, LBORI asks CEDAW and all governmental bodies to maintain the word sex in their recommendations and legislation to avoid to avoid conflating it or replacing it with gender. This clarity is crucial to the very survival of any lesbian community and to legal protection for women and girls as a sex class. Lesbians' rights, as it is for all women, are based on sex. UN Special Rapporteur Reem Al-Salem recently warned against erasing sex-based language, calling it a new form of violence against women. The language of gender is dangerous for women in general and for lesbians in particular, because it paves the way to legitimizing the concept of gender identity and subsequently of the right of men to self-identify as women. Gender identity is a lie that some men could be born in the wrong sexed bodies and possess female souls. This lie is then used by men to appropriate women's rights, spaces, and opportunities. Being a human female is not a feeling, but a biological fact. Men as a sex class use this biological fact to subordinate women as a sex class. There is no such thing as a female soul in a male body, nor vice versa. In fact, there's not even a female soul in a female body, nor vice versa. Humans are fully embodied. No part of us exists apart from our bodies. We are our body, and the body is never the wrong one. The concept of a male or female soul is a reactionary one because it accepts gender stereotypes that are historically determined by the cultures, politics, and economics of the patriarchal oppression of all women and girls as a sex class. Lesbian spaces, community, and culture would be destroyed if men claiming they are women were considered lesbians and allowed by law to participate. Lesbians' sexual orientation is based on attraction to the female sex, not to feminine gender presentation. Lesbians can be masculine looking or feminine looking, but their romantic love and sexual attraction are for women, never for men who claim to be women. Moreover, an increasing number of young lesbians accepting the concept of gender identity are being medicalized all over the world. They are administered puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Basically, the lie of gender identity allows the return of conversion therapy for the most vulnerable lesbians and other young women, forcing them to consider men as sexual partners. Transing of homosexuals is done explicitly as a conversion practice in very homophobic countries such as Iran. Finally, it should be noted that the gender identity agenda is unfortunately pushed by NGOs on women's associations around the globe through the power of funding to be given or denied, notwithstanding the fact that in most countries of the world, being born female is automatically a heavy burden and has nothing to do with the subjective claim of gender identity. There is no country in which any woman or girl can identify her way out of the pre-existing sex-based subjugation. Lesbian Bill of Rights International. And then I drafted the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus statement, which is longer and takes a different approach. To CEDAW, Women's Declaration International, WDI is a global nonpartisan group of volunteer women dedicated to protecting women's sex-based rights. Women's Declaration International USA Incorporated, that is WDI USA, is its US chapter. WDI promotes the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, or the Declaration, which has more than 39,000 signatures globally. The undersigned are the members of WDI USA's Lesbian Caucus. As radical feminists who are lesbians, we aim to abolish all gender, meaning sex stereotypes, not just transgender, but the entire spectrum of masculine to feminine, whether performed by a male or a female. Abolition of all gender is our aim because we understand that it is a system that functions to maintain the sex class of males as dominant and the sex class of females as subordinate. We aim to abolish that sex class system of dom-sub. In an article entitled, "Why Abolish Gender, What it Would Look Like and How to Do It," published on WDI USA's website, authors Lauren Levey, Fern Lopez, and Lorraine Nolan wrote the following. When gender is a pervasive system that each woman has internalized from the culture, as it surely must be to some degree, Free choice in matters regarding our own presentations and behaviors is an illusion, because what feels like a choice is so heavily influenced by our internalized system of gender. For this reason, radical feminists don't primarily examine personal presentations and behaviors as to whether or not they were freely chosen. They ask whether particular presentations and behaviors support the liberation of the sex class comprised of women and girls, end quote. We encourage you to read that article in its entirety, as it delves into the harms of gender stereotypes relating to Black women and to detransitioned and desisted women, in addition to lesbians. In this statement by the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus, we will focus on the harms of gender stereotypes relating to women as a class and lesbians in particular. Sheila Jeffries, one of the directors of WDI, has written and spoken extensively about harmful beauty practices, including in her 2005 book, Beauty and Misogyny. Jeffries describes how specific beauty practices, which exaggerate and enforce biological differences between the sexes, are typically framed either as natural or as freely chosen, and in any case, as being without generalizable culture-wide significance. She describes how these practices harm women individually and collectively, and for the purpose of enforcing the subordination of the female sex class. They harm women's health, diminish women's strength and mobility, and undermine women's dignity and ability to thrive as full humans entitled to full human rights. A partial list of such beauty practices includes transgender medicine, labiaplasty, anal bleaching, lip fillers, breast augmentation and mastectomy, body piercings, and clothing fashions such as shoes with high narrow heels and pointy toes, tight short skirts, long decorated fingernails, and plunging necklines. Jeffries explains that such practices are not freely chosen, which can be seen in the denial of privileges in public life to women who fail to adopt them. They are a condition of employment for most women in most high-paying jobs. These conditions support the domination-submission core of gender, with visible badges of subordination for women. While men in business attire have both feet planted with bodies covered in a dignified manner, their female counterparts teeter precariously on high heels, showing cleavage and other bare skin, unable to fully use their long-nailed fingers, and continuously having to move the required long hair out of their eyes, either by touching it or by tossing their heads. To gain precarious and conditional male acceptance of a woman's participation in public life, a woman is required to divert part of her attention away from her work and instead toward her self-conscious awareness of her impractical appearance and posture. The contrast in professional attire required for each sex, like the veil in other cultures, makes the female's subordinate status visible at a glance so that she can be treated accordingly. Explicitly abolishing gender in law and policy would be a statement that femininity has nothing to do with being female, and that women have a right to live consistently as free, dignified, full human beings, having full agency. As to lesbians in particular, authors Levey, Lopez, and Nolan wrote the following. This is quoting from this article by Levey, Lopez, and Nolan, which can be found on the WDI USA website. What would the abolition of gender look like for lesbians? First, the stigma of lesbian would end. The Lesbian Bill of Rights defines a lesbian as, quote, a female homosexual or a woman or girl who is exclusively same-sex attracted. By definition, lesbians are taboo in patriarchy because, first, they deny sexual access to all men, and second, they demonstrate that women have sexual agency, that sexual desire and satisfaction occur for them without male involvement. Both taboos exist as a consequence of gender, that is, the patriarchal requirement of universal male supremacy. There must be no viable exceptions, or else the rationale for patriarchy disappears. Without the dom subcomponent of gender, the stigma of being a lesbian disappears along with patriarchy itself. Second, the institution of state-sanctioned marriage would disappear, we think. Its purpose has always been for the state to regulate and be a party to long-term sexual relationships in order to support patriarchy, to manage the ownership and inheritance of property accordingly, and to encourage heterosexual married couples to have lots of legitimate children, especially sons or heirs. Its marketing strategies involve romance, religion, soulmate ideology, and tax breaks and immigration privileges. Some of these perks have no value to the collective interests of women and girls as a sex class, or lesbians in particular. Others should not be tied to marital status, like immigration. There are ways of organizing communities other than isolating each woman away from her birth family in a household headed by a man. Third, lesbian motherhood would no longer be valorized. Once women, including lesbians, are understood to be fully human, with equal access to productive public life, lesbians, like other women, would not be pressured to bear even one child, and the choice to become a mother would not be made or seen in the context of femininity or women's nature. Furthermore, lesbian motherhood would not be lamented as, how sad that the poor baby has no daddy. Being raised by a community of lesbians could arguably be quite a rich upbringing for any child, especially in a culture where gender has been eliminated. The lesbian gender identities of butch and femme, discussed on YouTube by Sheila Jeffries and Lauren Levey in February of 2024, would disappear. Butch means masculine and femme means feminine. Some lesbians make an attempt to reframe butch as simply not feminine or as non-conforming to gender expectations for women. But in common usage, butch maps the swagger of male entitlement and domination. Although some lesbians feel strongly that lesbian genders are innate and immutable, and that butch or femme, for instance, is who they are, there is no scientific evidence to support biological innateness. Without the power and romance and mystique of masculinity and femininity, butch and femme would no longer have a cultural foundation. So we predict that lesbians would not only be functioning workers in the public sphere, as most are now, but would also appear as fully functioning workers. And fifth, absent social stigma, there would be a lot more women living openly and visibly as lesbians for two reasons. First, lesbians would no longer be excluded from public life generally. And two, lesbian communities would be welcoming to new lesbians, to women who are wondering if they might be lesbians, and to women who wish to become lesbians. And many of those open and visible lesbians would undoubtedly be taking the lead in creating new and more just structures of social organization post-patriarchy. Thanks.